Hello, glad to see you. Come and join Donovan Brown and me in exploring church community, how it's changed, how it is still changing. Donovan, when you were ordained in 1957, you were called to establish a new church community in St. John's, Newfoundland, working with a group of lay people. In those early days of ministry, what was involved in community? What were the characteristics or the markers that you were trying to establish?
Well, that's an interesting question because I think there were many communities. There was the presbytery that, of course, I had become a member of in 1958 when St. John's Extension Council, another community, asked that there be a minister appointed to see if there was a possibility of establishing a fifth faith community in St. John's of the United Church. And so there was the presbytery, there was the Church Extension Council, and then there was another community called a Committee of 20, which before I arrived had been elected from a public meeting held in that St. John's Extension area, which grew up after the war. And there were several of these communities that I worked with. And my job was to see if we could get a new congregation formed. And there had been a sort of analysis made prior to my coming of the people who may be interested in establishing a new United Church. There were already four United Churches: Gower Street, Wesley, George Street, and Cochrane Street. And this would be the fifth. And I used to make a joke about it because I used to say this will be the first United Church in St. John's because all the rest were former Methodist churches. And so to establish community then beyond that was for me to go door to door, up and down Elizabeth Avenue, and from the east end of St. John's to the west end of St. John's in that northern area of the city, and trying to see if people would be interested. So that was my task from almost morning till night, was going from door to door.
Face to face, in the presence of one another.
In people's homes.
Yeah.
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 So then as ministry unfolded for you, how did you see community change? Now you moved away from St. John's, so you were in different locations over the years. But as you think back, how did community change?
Well, I think I moved from St. John's in '62 to Winnipeg, Manitoba, to St. Andrews River Heights United Church as an assistant minister. Dr. Earl Gordon was there, and it was he who had contacted me in Newfoundland and asked if I would come out, work with him. And again, that community sense of community hadn't changed all that much at that time, but it was starting to change. There were more people not at home when you called. We used to make pastoral calls in those days every day. In the afternoon, that was our job, going from, again, door to door from members of the congregation. And you would find that you were putting your card, "Sorry, I missed you," in the door. This is because more women were working. There were fewer people at home. And then I watched that sense of our community breaking down. And this would be in the early 60s, 62 to 67. And it changed in a way that we lost those contacts that we used to have with people. We still kept up the hospital visitations and nursing homes and stuff like that. So there was that sense of community. But the sense of being in people's homes, drinking tea and eating Christmas cake, that changed in the 60s. And of course, the 60s for me were big change because a lot of people in the United Church and other denominations were leaving, going into other professions. social work, library science, and teaching, and things like that. And I myself changed because I went back to university in 1967.
Mhm.
So that was a changing time, the 60s.
And over the course of your life, you've had experience on both sides of the pulpit. And certainly in recent years, you have participated in church community as a retired minister. Then COVID hits. COVID-19, we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic. Community, as we've come to know it, is no longer safe. And congregations start turning to Facebook, live streaming, Zoom, in order to gather as community. Very strange for many of us, but you, sir, you were quick to embrace this opportunity. And if I understand correctly, you're now in this new reality, this online reality, part of not one, but three communities. Can you tell us a bit about how did that happen and what's it like for you now, this new kind of community?
Well, I'm enjoying it because I go to the Streamline Church in St. John's, Newfoundland, St. James, the congregation that I started in 1958, and find that the pastor, the minister there, used to be in my junior choir, and she's now retired. and, and since there's no settled minister there, Marion is taking the services there, and it's just amazing for me to be able to turn that on and participate in that experience in St. John's. Well, then after when I went back to university in 1967 in the Boston area, I had a Presbyterian church part-time in the city of Newburyport, Massachusetts, at an old church, the Old South Presbyterian Church. The congregation was started in 1746, and the present building was built in 1756.
Hmm.
And I tune in on that on Sunday mornings, and after the service, they have a Zoom meeting where they discuss the sermon.
Hmm.
So I clicked in on that one Sunday back in the late fall, and found there were people on that in that Zoom meeting who remembered me. And I left there in I left in 1971. So that's what, 50 years ago. And one man said to me, he said, Donovan Brown. He said, you may not remember it, but you married my wife and me back in 1969. It's amazing connections.
Remarkable when so many of us, especially in this time of pandemic, are feeling disconnected, cut off from other people. Here you are, through technology, reconnecting with people that were part of church community not just a few years, but decades ago. It's quite remarkable, quite remarkable.
Exactly. Yes, it is, but it led me to theologize around the experience.
So please share with us.
Well, I have come to the conclusion that separation physically makes possible a spiritual connection that we may not have had before.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yes, so I back in the spring, I attend Trinity United Church here in Peterborough now, and I was asked to take the service in May, early COVID days, and I preached on the subject creative absence.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it was Ascension Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
So I read
Ah.
the lesson of Jesus saying, it is important for you, expedient for you that I go away.
Mm-hmm.
His physical presence did not make possible the sending of the Spirit.
Hmm.
It's only in his absence.
Yeah.
Because I go away, I will send you the Holy Spirit.
So we shouldn't be so afraid of absence.
Aha, aha, aha. because, it's trite to say absence makes the heart grow fonder,
Yeah.
but there's some truth in that. And so presence can make the heart go less fond.
Mm-hmm.
Presence can make the heart become indifferent.
Hmm.
Presence can block connections. For instance, you are in the presence of someone that you find rather unkempt, probably not practicing good hygiene. And so what do? You turn off.
Mm.
The presence may block your connecting with the person.
Hmm.
So I find absence is a very creative possibility for a spiritual connection. We may be physically disconnected, but spiritually connected.
Mm-hmm. A kind of contradiction, and
Oh, yeah.
in this contradiction, there's possibility, there's life.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, very much so. As I say, I'm very excited about the connections that I'm making now that I would not have made had it not been for the imposed absence.
So to put you on the spot a little bit, Donovan, this pandemic, we are assured, is not going to last forever. And the day will come when being physically present with a number of people in a building like a church is going to become safe again. As you look forward to that possibility, at another possibility, what thoughts do you have about how we might approach a post-pandemic re-examination of community? Would you like us to? Would you like to see? Would you like to see some kind of both and, where people continue an online
Exactly.
connection?
I suggested that to my present congregation here in Peterborough, Trinity United Church, because, be honest with you, when I did that service back in May, there were 326 hits.
Yeah.
We don't get 326 people in church. We're lucky if we get 56. So I think we should continue to meet, to scatter, but we also should continue to keep the Zoom meetings going and the videos being done like you're doing now.
So you see tremendous opportunity in this online way of gathering. One of the big differences is no handshaking at the door. It used to be that a minister would lead worship and at the end of the service, connect with people in a very direct way, get some feedback about the service, check in about how folks are doing. And I know more than a few ministers who are really struggling with this absence in their ministry. So they see the benefit of online, and there's no question that many churches are having more folks come to church when they can do it online. But what about that relationship between a minister and members of the congregation, and the relationship of members of the congregation one with another?
Yes, I think that's difficult because you have many seniors, I wouldn't have no doubt, that are not tech savvy and probably don't even own a computer. So it wouldn't be helpful for them. And, but I think to do both is important.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
As I say, I think the physical connection often has a lot of flaws in it. It wasn't for naught, that Sigmund Freud, when he first practiced, he had his Anelsan on a couch and he sat behind the person. He was there but not seen.
Interesting.
And so God is here but not seen. I'm convinced of the reality of God in my life, but I've never seen God.
And perhaps,
but I know God is there.
yes, and perhaps in this time of not being as present with one another physically, perhaps more of us will have that experience you're describing, that sense of God present but not seen.
That's right. And no one's looked upon the face of God and lived, of course. So but it reminds me of one of the early church fathers who wrote, "He whom we loved and lost is no longer where he used to be. He is now everywhere that we are." In other words, the lack of the physical presence opened up the reality of the total connection, eternal connection.
Which is a long-standing fundamental theological principle. And yet, certainly over the course of our lifetime, and when I was a lot younger, there were many people who were convinced the only way to experience God was to be in the church on Sunday morning. And this moment we're in is certainly bringing us back to that fundamental theological principle. Not where you think, but everywhere God is present.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, in everybody, it's to appeal to that God within each person. Because the physical is temporal. We all know that. I mean, here I'm pushing close to 90, and I realize how temporal this body of mine is. But my spiritual nature is not fading the way my physical nature is.
That's very evident, very evident. Now, I'm wondering, as you participate in online worship in not one but 3 congregations in not one country but 2 countries, if anything has concerned you, or if there was any aspect of being online community that you think we need to pay attention to going forward.
Well, when it comes, for me at least, they will either announce the hymn or put it up on the screen. I sing along with the hymns. I pray with the Lord's Prayer. I participate. I'm there, and I think that the Old South one in the States is great, because right on the same link after the service, you go right into the Zoom meeting, and they have a chap in Iowa who's a minister, and he sort of conducts that conversation where we discuss the sermon, and the minister's present.
Aha, aha.
And she participates in the discussion, and we do that. That's an hour after the service. So it's very, very fulfilling for me to be able to share in that discussion, and go back all those years and see some of the people that were teenagers. Tells me how old I am, really.
Well, Donovan Brown, thank you so very much for sharing in this conversation today and helping us see that when it comes to experiencing church community, we are not done yet. There's still much potential, much opportunity.
Well, just think about it. You and I wouldn't be doing this today had this not to taken place.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.